All right, all right, all right. How's it going, everyone? I am Randall Warnas, and I could not be more excited to be doing this panel today. I think that we are really at a point within the industry in which we're all trying to find answers to where we're going. And today, I'm amongst some of the greatest experts within the drone industry to talk about a topic that is truly, it's almost a mystery, but it's so impactful within the drone industry. So basically how this came about is Brett Conda and Bobby Sakaki reached out and said, look, we should do an event in which we were discussing this, and we put together the panel probably within 24 hours, and brought this to life about 2 weeks ago. So I want to say thanks to Bobby and Brett for encouraging this to happen, because every time I do one of these things, it gets me like full of nerves and I just want it to go well. But using a platform to bring people together and just have meaningful conversations about the drone industry is super important. Before we get started, there's a few other housekeeping things. I do want to thank everyone on the panel for joining, but especially the guys from DIU and AUVSI, because this conversation talking about Blue UAS, Green UAS wouldn't really be fair, or it wouldn't be complete without having them a part of it. So everyone taking time out of your busy days to come and chat, thank you. It means the world. Also, thanks to my guy Preston Grimes for doing all the artwork and helping me out in the back end, testing sound and all of that stuff. It just makes it so that it's something more recognizable. The poster that was sent out, hopefully it's a visual that people will be like, that thing with the bear, and like that means something. But he always does me favors and doesn't ask for anything for doing them. So I just want to say thanks for that. And then the last thing is this morning, John Beal canceled on us because he brought his new baby into the world this morning. So if you don't know John, go on to his LinkedIn, connect with him, tell him congratulations, because it's not every day you get to have such an exciting and life-changing and oftentimes life-altering experience. So anyways, just wanted to throw that out there. And then also, Vern from Axon wasn't able to join. He told me this about a week ago. He had some conflicts. So we're just going to proceed with the questions and with the panel that we have. So we've just want to say thanks for Vern being willing, but it didn't work out. So now let's get to who we have on the panel. And I'm guessing what I see is different than what you guys see. So I'm just going to go how I see it. And if you guys want to just give an introduction about who you are, what you're doing in the drone space, maybe how long you've been in the game, just so everyone can get an idea of who you are. I think also this is big in, building out our networks, knowing who knows what about what topics and who they could reach out to. I'm sure that everyone here on the panel is willing to have people reach out to them for whatever suits their expertise. And so I encourage you to do that. But on my screen, I have Chris Ihorn. You are first up to do a quick intro, if you would.
Great. Thanks, Randall. Thanks for hosting this as well. Yeah, so Chris Ihorn, founder and CEO of DroneSense. I started DroneSense back in 2015. So if anybody remembers the old 3D robotics days, those were kind of the end of that cycle. So yeah, so we build a software platform. We're laser focused on the needs of public safety. So whether it's flying the drone, managing your back end, live streaming, or even drone as first responder. We've built a platform that really abstracts away the hardware differences and allows us to be drone agnostic. So I'm excited to be here.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. And next we have Brandon Carr from LIDA, replacing John with, I would say, the bar set high, but I trust he got a good replacement in, and this was last minute. So Brandon, thanks for filling in.
I appreciate it, Randall. Thanks so much. Yeah, my name is Brandon Carr. I'm the Public Relations Officer and Board Member for Law Enforcement Drone Association, or LIDA. I started the Pearland Police Department's drone program, built it into the program that it is today. Now I work for DroneSense actually as the drone first responder solutions engineer and also co-founder for Unmanned Tactical Group.
Perfect. Thanks, Brandon. Charles, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Charles Warner, the retired fire chief from Charlottesville, Virginia, and I started in drones in 2015 as I was ending my career as a fire chief. I was always involved in technology. Saw drones as what I saw as the next big thing for public safety. Started the National Council on Public Safety UAS and did that for a couple of years. And that was a community of like minds, but it wasn't a body that we could partner with. So in 2019, we started Drone Responders. which is the Drone Responders Public Safety Alliance, which is now the leading and largest nonprofit public safety organization in the world, with over 7,400 members and participation from 87 countries.
Amazing. Thanks for being here, Charles. Tim, you're next.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Tim Martin. I just recently retired after 28 years in law enforcement, started the drone program in Huntington Beach from the ground up. I'm currently the director of training for the Regional Training Center here in California. I do subcontract work in the Blue UAS space for Blue UAS company. It's been great exposure for me. Different platforms. I've been involved in the trials for the soldier-borne system and the SROC program in the Blue space.
Perfect. Thanks, Tim. Brett, you're up next.
Thanks, Randall. My name is Brett Conda. I'm coming up on year number 10 in the drone industry. I spent the first 4 years on entrepreneurial ventures, mostly as a service provider, and then spent about 2.5 years working for the FAA UAS Integration Office, running the Nevada test site. So mostly focused on UTM and large system testing. And then joined Randall over at FLIR for about 2.5 years, and we were managing the global industrial UAS business over at FLIR. And I've spent the last bit here as the first employee over at Brink, focused on law enforcement and indoor tactical operations, and going to be announcing my next venture here very shortly, but excited to be here.
Thanks, Brett, as always. We got Rich, you're up next.
Thanks, Randall. Rich 𝐀𝐁𝐎, Southern Manatee Fire Rescue, part of the hazmat team there, technician for 20 years now. We started a UAS hazmat team back in about 2015. Gained some notoriety with some of the outlandish things that we were doing with our hazmat team in drone tech. Also working with Charles as the Flow Group, one of the leadership members of the Flow Group team here in Florida UAS Coordination Group. Currently about 300 plus members of our team that we started about 2 years ago when this legislation started that changed our state, and which we'll probably talk about quite a bit today. So should be some pretty interesting conversations, and I feel like I'm in a room full of giants here, so I'm happy to be a part of this. I've always loved this podcast, so thanks, Randall, for inviting me.
Appreciate you being here, Rich. All right, next we have Trent from DIU. You're muted, Trent. Happens to the best of us.
Yeah, good way to start. My name's Trent Emmenecker. I was an active duty Marine, which is where my first interaction with drones at the tactical level came from a long time ago. Since then, I've been in the reserves and have remained aware of the tactical evolution of what we have or don't have. After leaving active duty, I worked for GE Aviation. After that, I came to the Defense Innovation Unit a couple years ago. 6 weeks ago, I came to Blue UAS and replaced David Michelson, who a lot of you may have worked with, and before that, Shelby Oaks. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Trent. Michael, you're up next.
Great. Thanks, Randall. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Hello, everyone. Michael Robbins. I'm the Chief Advocacy Officer for 𝐕𝐈𝐍, the Association for Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International. I came to 𝐕𝐈𝐍 in a full-time capacity in June of 2020. Before that, 𝐕𝐈𝐍 was one of my clients. I was a multi-client consultant. Before co-founding that consulting firm, I was at the Airline Pilots Association doing aviation work on the traditional aviation side. And before that, spent a decade on Capitol Hill, where I was the chief of staff to the late John Dingell from Michigan, also a reservist in the United States Navy.
Perfect. Thanks for being here, Michael. Bobby, you round us out.
Man, I'm the presence of giants. Really honored to be here. Thanks again for putting this together. Bobby Sakaki. Just launched UAS Nexus about a month or two ago. Been consulting the industry for about a decade. Worked on the counter UAS side for a company called White Hawks Defense Technologies, still around. Worked for you at Autel, Randall. And then worked for Ascent Aerosystems, running their product and like their Blue UAS stuff the last year. Really honored to be here. Thanks for being part of the conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think that the feeling probably is across the board as far as like being around people that we all respect. We hear their names pop up or their organizations they represent come up. And so, you know, having a room full of people that are doing so much for representing their communities, representing drone technology, and representing, you know, public safety use largely across the board. I think that everyone out there should understand why this panel is suited to have this conversation. I think that another nice thing is that if Bobby is distracted, we'll know because we could see the reflection of your computer in your glasses. So we'll make sure that you're keeping your eyes on. No, don't take them off, bro. It was a joke. But anyways, last thing I'll just say, I'm Randall Warnas. I've been in the industry 9 years. Spent a good portion of that time at DJI, FLIR. 9 beautiful weeks at Autel as their CEO, and been a DSLRPros part of back in the reseller space. And it's been interesting for me to jump around from representing manufacturers to being able to represent multiple manufacturers and being a little bit removed, a step removed from these kind of conversations. So I think that I'm somewhat neutral. I've worked closely with Brett. I've worked closely with Bobby in the past. Chris and I spent some time overseas together, and then obviously going to trade shows. Make sure Denver Exponential next week. Make sure to say hello. I would assume a good portion of us will be there. But to kick things off, the idea behind this conversation is really clear cut. There's blue UAS and blue and green UAS, and it might have changed the green SUAS and blue SUAS. I don't know when the S was put in there. Maybe it always was. But these programs were developed for a specific purpose, and especially starting with Blue. Blue was developed for a specific purpose, and it's evolved into being kind of a benchmark for a lot of things that have happened in the drone industry, by way of looking at country of origin, what technology is not accepted for federal funds and things like that. So I don't want to steal the whole conversation. So Trent, I think you're the first to speak on this. What is Blue UAS? What was its purpose? Where has it gone? Just kind of give us the rundown so we can level set on Blue.
Sure. So first, I know most folks are familiar with the Defense Innovation Unit, but that is an organization that's chartered to strengthen our national security by leveraging the commercial marketplace to accelerate adoption of platforms and technology and capability that we have commercially today. Get it into DoD quickly. That's one thing that DoD does not do very fast. I don't think any of us are going to argue that. Blue UAS was created to do just that. The commercial marketplace was solving the problem on a time scale years and years ahead of where our traditional programs of record and acquisitions processes were capable of. So DIU saw the need, and we created a way to get that technology into DoD. How do we do that? Well, we look at cybersecurity standards above and beyond all, and I should make this clear, we have to comply with the law. There is federal law, the NDA of 2020, Section 848, that I know lots of us are familiar with, that governs what can and cannot be used. And so, that's kind of our Bible. That's what we adhere to. So how did we create it? Well, it was to fill a gap and to get platforms in the hands of the warfighter who could actually go and use them and start developing their TTPs and meeting the needs that we see today. I think all of us see the real world examples, not just in the national security arena, but in law enforcement and the things that drones help with today. It's intended to be kind of a continuous approach. It's not a one-stop static snapshot in time. And, Randall mentioned it's evolved because we want to try and mirror what the commercial marketplace is doing when it comes to technologies and capabilities. Things change. We have to figure out a way to get it in. Now, does the government always move as fast as we want? No. DIU, we like to think that we always move quickly. Sometimes we don't move as fast as we should. But our goal is to continue to provide those options to the warfighter that meet the needs that we identify on a timely and cost-effective scale.
And as you're talking about the warfighter, I believe that Blue was built in the dawn of the SRR program. And it created a product or a specification for drone technology that was for the warfighter. At what point did that bleed into the talk about Blue outside of defense and into the public domain?
Sure. So again, I've got to emphasize, Blue UAS meets federal law and DoD requirements. Something that we always are trying to partner with, though, is to raise overall standards within the industry. Because if we can improve cybersecurity, If we can develop our own national supply chain base for both the U.S. and our friendly partners and allies, that's going to benefit us all. Where have we seen kind of that overlap? Well, people have seen Blue UAS. They kind of understood what the program and project is doing, and they have tended to align with that when there was the absence of anything else. I understand that the needs of state, local governments, the private sector, commercial sector, that's very different than what DoD needs. So they're two very different things. We focus on DoD, and we're happy that our products, they're not my products. They're our commercial partners' products, but that those products on the Blue UAS are viewed as things that are trustworthy and capable.
For sure. So let's go to Charles. And you obviously represented a large organization of public safety users of drone technology. I mean, maybe you could further define how Blue has kind of entered into the public safety domain, how it's discussed in making decisions about drone hardware and the use of drone technology.
Yeah, I think what we first started seeing was the movement in legislation to ban DJI drones. And in order to do that, it meant, what were you doing it for? Why were you doing it? And the Blue UAS was, as was mentioned, there wasn't any other standard as far as safety and security. But what happened from that is that people then assumed and that Blue UAS was the answer when it wasn't, because there weren't enough companies listed in secure. I mean, they couldn't be tested at that time because DIU couldn't test other companies just because they wanted to be tested. So then we had a very small list to choose from, which made the selection very difficult. In addition to that, we've heard lots of different things about what is and what isn't, and it's not very clear. And when you look at the legislations that started going forward, we started seeing that public safety was being penalized more than the private sector. So we were going to actually say, now you've got to have a Blue UAS, which means it can't be used because it doesn't fall into the NDEA requirements. It can't be tested. It can't be used. And therefore, we have departments across the country that have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment with no, and really the only reason the DJI was selected by public safety was cost and capability. I mean, that's the bottom line. And in our study in 2020, we asked public safety, what is your thought of your preference of American-made drones? And 80% of the respondents said they would prefer to have an American-made drone, but it had to meet cost and capability. And I think the other problem with this whole thing is that when you look at the playing field's not equal because China put in $1.4 billion of subsidies for DJI to continue to grow in the marketplace and to a $4.6 billion market. And we aren't seeing that same kind of offering from American-made drones. But then we started seeing it bleed over into GSA contracts. So it was GSA being federal contracts, which weren't public safety, which weren't DoD. So by the mere point of, and I think that the bigger picture is this is a geopolitical issue. It's a bigger picture than just the drones. There's a lot more going on. This is not going to go away. So people had to feel like they needed to find something to base it on. And that's where I think that the DoD and the Blue UAS came in.
Perfect. And I just kind of want to summarize a few things. One is that a lot of people, the sentiment is this was an effort to box out DJI specifically, but Chinese manufactured drones maybe secondarily. And the first tranche of Blue UAS were Teal, Skydio, Vantage Robotics, Altavian, and Parrot, right? So then there's a second tranche, and the list expanded, but Ascent Aerosystems was one of them, which Bobby was a part of, went through that process of becoming Blue, which is a process. And so I'm kind of molding two questions together, but you mentioned the cost. Cost is one of the biggest disadvantages to looking at Blue platforms versus what is available commercially through Chinese manufacturers like DJI. So I wanted to ask Bobby this first, because you're so involved in componentry. What are ways that we could look to reduce the cost of either Blue or domestically manufactured drone platforms? What have you seen as you've scoured for representing a manufacturer?
Lowering the costs is ultimately based on demand. I think the Blue UAS program is extremely, I'd say it's probably critical to the success of the American drone industry. I think without it, It's safe to say none of these companies would really be able to kind of innovate in the way they've been able to. And I'm talking about even from the component level all the way to the vehicle OEM. It's truly something that I think it's needed. From a cost perspective, you need volume. And so what happens is you need demand, and at the same time, but I would argue that banning DJI is not going to lower the price of banning nobody's going to lower the price. And I think if anything, it's going to prevent that price from going down. But you need to increase the volume of which the products are purchased and the core components that comprise them. So 80% of Blue UAS currently use the same autopilot. Many folks are looking to, I think, offer other compelling products. We need to, I think, work together as vehicle OEMs to strategize how to build our componentry. And it's not just based on sourcing. A lot of it's based on functionality. Like the stuff can be made, NDA compliant, but does it work together very well? Do the radios talk to the autopilots? Does the camera systems work? How do you bypass, do you need to use the companion computer that the camera uses? Can you use the ones you have on board the aircraft? These are discussions we have to have. And ultimately is the investment that Charles alluded to. And it is a geopolitical issue. If you want to follow the price of drones, you can follow cell phones. If we aren't building those products domestically, we don't really have the capability to lower the price.
Okay. Chris, you're kind of like lined up to kind of follow up on this. Do you have some takes on how the drone industry can respond to domestic manufacturing being much higher than it would be in China for labor reasons, sourcing of components and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a few points. I think one, right, in the past 20 years, we've been on this globalization path, right, where we were encouraged to go manufacture in China, build these partnerships. And so now that the pendulum's swinging to this deglobalization, I think the timing of that, along with kind of the Blue program, created a bad situation for public safety. I think, when you give a bunch of innovative U.S. companies government contracts to go build these drones within a certain specification box, right? They're going to go and they're going to say, hey, like, while for the government, these may be very inexpensive drones, it's had the unintended consequences of having very expensive drones for public safety, right? And we basically put the U.S. industry on these guide rails about the autopilot, the radio to use, the camera to use, right? And so in a sense, while I definitely agree with Bobby that there's been some innovation, but it's been very on these very specific guide rails of where we're going. It's had that unintended consequence of not being able to innovate in other creative ways that could create U.S. manufactured drones that don't rely on the same autopilot, don't rely on the same radio technology, but we've incentivized everybody to get on these rails and basically go build to the specifications so that they can unlock the government contracts. And I think that puts U.S. manufacturers in an awkward position because now it's, you hear the same thing. It's like, hey, I can't go sell this to the U.S. government for this price and then cut it in half for public safety, right? And so there's just inherent contracting problems that it's created. And we're now in that situation where we've got deglobalization, we've got, legislation in Florida going on in other states. And we're kind of at this juncture, this critical point where, how do we fix this, right? And I think that's where we've got to really start looking at, I think as Bobby pointed out, collaboration, but we need to get sensible standards in place for the components and really understand, like, look, does it really matter if a camera is made in China? Does it really matter if the Jetson onboard computer is made in China, right? But, does the carrier board need to be in the US? So I think it's really hard and it's stifling for US drone companies to go build new things when you've got these tight parameters in place and that's driving your bomb.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Trent, this is something for you to respond to, but the SRR program, I'm going to say circa 2018. I don't know exactly when the starting point was, but you basically had manufacturers with a spec sheet that said, you know, we want a 320 resolution thermal camera. We want an RGB camera on board. We want flight time around 30 minutes. It was basically to replace the drones that were being commercially taken off the shelf and used in the field. But then you had manufacturers with basically carbon copies of each other. It was the same capabilities. Skydio added AI. Everyone had their own flavors of how they were selling it, but it basically they put all their investment money in hopes to win this SRR first tranche, and then we're like, well, we might as well commercialize it. So you saw a lot of carbon copy drones come out. Now, in some of those, you're seeing, well, in those airframes, you're seeing thermal cameras, which are probably the largest component within the BOM. Doesn't matter if they're manufactured in China, or doesn't matter if they're manufactured in Santa Barbara at FLIR. That's a question in which, you know, a significant part of driving the cost up is having that component specifically manufactured in the United States. So the question is, when DIU created these parameters, it was for the warfighter, but as the commercial space has adopted Blue UAS as a benchmark, was that the intention, or could DIU now kind of lax on certain components, as Chris mentioned, and basically just focus on communicative componentry in how they vet the process? Or is that not okay based off the standards of federal government, like you mentioned before?
Yeah, so we don't have a whole lot of flexibility. The law is what the law is. The policy is what the policy is. It's written, and until either the law or the written policy that we have to operate by changes, that's what we're going to go and execute on. I certainly understand the cost. I understand the questions around, what is needed, what isn't needed. But where we are today with the law and the policy as it exists, we don't have the flexibility to change that. And the other thing I would add is, DIU, we're the venue between the warfighter and industry. We don't set the parameters. The warfighter says, these are the things we need. And, I think a lot of us have seen, sometimes they're right and our requirements process gets it right. And sometimes it gets it wrong, whether it's out of date or it's excessive. And that, I think, contributes to what Chris was saying. But we don't pick and choose anything. We execute the policy, we follow the law, and we try and match our commercial friends with the warfighter so that we can have a mutual win-win. That doesn't work perfectly, but that's what we try to do.
Appreciate that. And this question is for Rich, because I know we kind of mentioned that this would be an area that you would have some thoughts on. Since the initial blue list required thermal, what do you find public safety agencies are doing when they don't want thermal and they don't need to pay for that high value sensor? They're just trying to get eyes in the sky with an RGB camera, and there's not really a blue manufacturer that's doing that, especially at an affordable cost.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because the challenge is, especially like what happened here in the state of Florida, because they adopted pretty much the Blue UAS list. And we could spend 2 days talking about the process that took place there on the political level. But the challenge with that is, because it was just such a quick check of a box, that it did leave a lot of folks with their hands in the air, because of pricing, right? At the end of the day, thermal's expensive on drones. Now, the good news is most agencies, one of the capabilities they want is to be able to have night operations, right? 24-hour capability, that's what we want. But for entry-level agencies that had very, small budgets for drones, thermal may not have been in the picture yet, or was going to be down the road. But we've kind of, because of the way I'm speaking for in the state of Florida specifically, the way that the legislation went down, it really kind of pushed a lot of folks out of the ability to be able to jump into those into the thermal place, or out of the thermal place, I should say. But when you look at that from a grand perspective, the fact that when you're leaning on DIU, and this is nothing against DIU, these guys are doing their job, right? They were told, hey, make us a list for Fed, for DOD. When public safety adopts that without doing their due diligence. I'm not saying public safety folks, but the legislators adopt that for public safety without doing due diligence. It has a huge significant financial impact on folks that have been using drone technology for a long time. So, you know, it's unfortunate. There's a lot of agencies, I can tell you, in the state of Florida. I would say there's, you know, maybe at least 20% of the agencies that we've spoken to that have the end capabilities because they just can't afford to dive into the Blue UAS level drones. It's unfortunate, but that's the direction we're moving, and we're seeing that across the board now in other states that are adopting kind of the same rules. It looks like they're learning a lot from what happened in Florida. You know, we could talk about that too, the organization side and all that good stuff, but it's a challenge. I know firsthand from some of these folks, it's a challenge.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, the purpose of this conversation, there's, you know, a few more than 100 people in here, and that's a good number of people to influence. But how difficult is it to influence decision makers, lawmakers, and to say, do some due diligence? Here's a bunch of people you could ring up and have a meaningful conversation with. But it's not that easy. And I feel like we as an industry feel a little stifled because we don't always get to weigh in on these conversations. Lobbying dollars go a long way. And if you have the right money, and your voice is going to be heard. And that's the unfortunate truth within politics. You mentioned adoption, and I think you could either kick this off, or Brett, we mentioned that this might be something you have some thoughts on about adoption of drone technology in public safety since the Blue UAS standard was rolled out in Florida and has been looked at as kind of the first mover to making these sorts of decisions. You mentioned that, you know, there are several departments. Rich, you mentioned several departments have basically stopped their UAS program, or, you know, at the moment they can't do anything with the DJI drones that not only cannot be on their shelves, but literally have to be disposed of or gotten rid of, from my understanding. So if someone was a year ago would get called out and they'd bring their drone, that DJI drone is now no longer with them. And if they don't have the money or the grants or whatever to replace it, they're not doing anything with the UAS program. How have you seen that kind of cause the industry to take a step back? Rich, you could start us off, and then Brett, if you want to do a follow-up on that.
Yeah, so obviously an agency losing capabilities is always not a good thing, right? You don't want agencies not to be able to show up and put a drone in the air. What I would say is that what we've done here in Florida in the wake of the legislative challenges that we've had, we got motivated. We organized at a state level, and this is something I try to encourage everybody to do, every state to do. And we fielded hundreds, well, dozens, we'll call it dozens of calls with agencies from different states that saw what's happening in Florida, and they say, hey, this might be happening with us. What do we got to do to create what you guys have? Because in the wake of that, we built FlowGRU, the Florida UAS Coordination Group, through drone responders, and it became a sounding board, or you know, we became pretty popular in the state, especially at the legislative level. So some of the folks that we have on our team have heavy voices, and it gave us a seat at the table at Tallahassee. So that was big for us. But what it also did, more to your point, was now we were coordinated with other agencies around us. So we got to know a lot of the folks that we may not have known before. Again, I want to say 330, 340 members. I want to say maybe 150, 160 agencies in the state of Florida that are part of FlowGRU now. So we have these conversations, we communicate with each other, we do trainings throughout the state. But what even more importantly is now I know my neighbors, I know what their capabilities are now, what they do have, what they don't have. So if they needed something, they know they can reach out to us for support. And that's what it boils down to, right? Help, you know, agency helping out agency. You know, unmanned systems have been I think the bridge between law enforcement and fire that you've never seen before, right? Fire and cops have always like had this like cat and dog kind of relationship, but unmanned systems have been what has brought us together. So being able to know my neighbors and know what their capabilities are, or what they've lost because of this legislation, has been a huge help. So I think that's how we're kind of answering the call. That may not fix the problem, but it's a temporary band-aid and a solution for the time being.
Well, I would ask which is the cat and which is the dog, but we'll
obviously we're the dogs. Obviously.
Perfect. Brett, do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, sure. So the short answer is has Blue List and potentially green list slow down adoption rates? I think the answer is undoubtedly it has. However, I remember when we were at FLIR and we got the spec list for the original SRR program, we kind of looked at it and we're like, this isn't going to work for everybody. The 320 thermal, 12 megapixel RGB camera, this was maybe a quarter the capability of an XT2 or a DJI produced payload. And, you know, I would imagine, Trent, that DIU early in those days was not thinking like this is going to be the de facto list for the entire global drone industry. I'd be hard pressed to think those were the conversations going on. But the reality is that it was the first list. And unfortunately, today, with how quickly our industry moves in consolidation, there's really only 2 platforms, maybe 3 platforms still available from that original list. So I think that this green list is answering the real issue of the non-DoD federal agencies, because those are the ones that really adopt at scale. And when, you know, Bobby was talking about volume is key here for everything. And the FBI and ATF and, you know, Department of the Interior and the Forestry Service, these are large scale, high volume programs that in some ways it feels like we're starting over. And I know we're going to touch, you know, pretty shortly here on, you know, how far behind are we actually as a U.S. drone industry? So I don't want to go too much into that, but I've worked intimately with DJI. You've obviously worked intimately with DJI. Their capabilities, and Autel included, their capabilities domestically from a technology, labor, supply chain, you name it, surpasses us in every way. So these lists are necessary. And I think that we had an interesting, you know, seat at the table, Randall, where we were a part of one of the very few companies that was dual use and effectively did dual use in both the defense and the industrial market. And I can't tell you guys how messy it was internally with the defense UAS team and the industrial UAS team trying to figure it out. And, you know, Trent mentioned it earlier, the use case, the training requirements, the volume and the scale of the Defense Department's drone program, there is no overlap to what we do here. You know, the biggest public safety drone programs are probably state police, and they're to the tune of whatever, 15, 20, 25. That's like that's a throwaway fleet for a Defense Department in terms of training. So it's set us back, but I want to stay optimistic and say that this is a temporary pause. And this is something that's going to get worked out. The green list is still very new. And I know, you know, we're going to get into that with Michael, but yeah, it definitely stunted growth a little bit, but, you know, I think everyone on this call and the industry at large is trying to figure out the best path forward here. So I still think the future is bright.
Perfect. I appreciate that. And Michael, don't think I've forgotten you. The green portion of this is very, very important, but I just want to dig one more scoop deeper into the blue stuff, and then we'll try to bring them all together. But in the opinion of law enforcement, and Brandon, this one's for you, in the opinion of law enforcement in general, do they want to have these stringent guidelines by which products they can purchase? Is there a lot of concern about cybersecurity of law enforcement assets, where if somebody was accessing a Chinese server, for instance, that they could see who you're apprehended or what neighborhoods you're flying over? Is that something that applies to you, or are you just mixed in it because you get funding from the federal government? How do you see that?
Well, as with all things cops, we like to respond with "it depends." So if you have a public safety agency, a law enforcement agency that is butting up next door to a defense facility, you obviously are going to need to have that interoperability, and you don't want to have something that would jeopardize their operations, just as you don't want their operations to jeopardize yours. So there are going to be agencies that are law enforcement that are going to need to have the same level of data security, the same level of green UAS certification, or even blue UAS certification in some instances, in some of those areas. Now, on the flip side of that, you are also going to talk to a lot of law enforcement in the room that all they care about is going home at the end of the day. They want to be able to use a drone, whatever drone, so that they are able to get eyes in the sky, have situational awareness for that event, and be able to go home safely with as much information as possible. So unfortunately, it is across the entire spectrum. There are some agencies that they could barely afford a Mavic Mini, much less a Blue UAS platform or even a Green UAS platform to some extent, right? So there has to be a pathway for all of those agencies to be able to utilize drones for a first responder incident. I think that the answer, in my personal perspective on that, the answer is in a data security policy. I think a data security policy and a vetting for every agency needs to be in place, and that needs to be legislated. But it doesn't necessarily have to be Blue UAS level, but there definitely needs to be some type of vetting for every agency on, if you're going to be putting these drones on a network, you need to validate where that data is going and what is touching your network.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Tim, I want to get your perspective on this too, and kind of as a follow-up, Charles or Rich, if you want to say something as well. The question, I mean, was, does this impact you personally? Does this, the way that you gather information, is the chance there's a cybersecurity leak to China, does it compromise your ability to use drones? But there's also the question of, well, can DJI or a Chinese manufactured drone pass those cybersecurity laws, whether their servers are AWS servers in Seattle, and I don't know if that's where they actually have servers, but I'm just going to say AWS servers in the United States, third-party vetted. I mean, DJI probably has spent dollar for dollar more money than any drone manufacturer on their cybersecurity, and maybe someone could argue that, but they've had every reason to. And so can DJI or Chinese manufactured, or if it's not manufactured in the United States, can that pass these benchmarks to then become commercially available to first responders and the like? And Tim, I'll let you kind of take all those words and make a question of it and then answer however you feel.
I think that's the biggest concern for public safety. You know, the Blue UAS program has benefited a lot of agencies as well. And you have to look at where agencies that were never using quadcopters, federal agencies that were using fixed wing options for years and years, are now able to have platforms that they can use out there to further, like Brandon said, now our federal partners are out there making it safe as they approach buildings or do warrants. So there's a lot of benefits to it, and all of those concerns of cybersecurity are, it's for them, it's a no-brainer because they know. The bigger question is should you have all DJI or all Autel or one single fleet? Diversifying your fleet is obviously one of the biggest things, because I'm not an expert at what DJI do, but I know that on several occasions when you start up a DJI, and you need to do an update, and it won't fly without that update. And could DJI flip a switch in the United States and ground every law enforcement drone, everybody using a DJI drone if they wanted to? And that's a big question that I can't answer, but we should be asking that question. We should be vetting what we're flying. And cybersecurity obviously is a big. We're all issued now, you know, with in the start of the program, we were using, you know, personal cell phones to connect to our drones, or we were using department cell phones. So things have changed a lot in that aspect, to where a lot of the smart controllers are changing the perspective of how data is collected in what we're doing. So some of the problems are working out themselves. And when you look at the Blue platforms, a lot of the issues that you guys brought up earlier about the 320 thermal cameras and battery life and some of the other issues, we're seeing second generations of Blues, if you will, coming out now. Teal just released theirs, and Vantage Robotics is working on the Vesper 2, and I'm sure a lot of these things can be addressed with like Brett said, we got to be patient. You know, we got to be patient. We have to see what the future holds for these drones, because right now we don't have a lot of options.
It's interesting that you mentioned a diversification of a fleet. Yeah, it sounds like a good idea, but I think that's where some of the challenges come in, where it's like you trained on one platform, but now you're using another out in the field. And, you know, like a firearm, you generally want to train on the one that you're going to use on game day, right? And so I think that that's interesting. And Tim, you kind of submitted this as something that is worth talking about, but how is that training process different on Blue UAS platforms versus a DJI platform or an Autel platform? And kind of dig deeper into that diversification thing, because when we're talking about cost, when we're talking about standards, like I have to update all my drones because DJI pushed out something. Oh wait, I just got this teal thing and I have to update that separately. I mean, there's a workflow involved in all of this. So you, not me, as the expert with working with law enforcement and first responders across the board, how would you see that diversification as both a positive and a challenge for putting together a drone program?
You know, I think there's kind of two parts to that answer. Number one is the aspect of training for safe operations in the national airspace. That's consistent no matter what you're flying. It doesn't matter if you're flying a DJI or one of the Blues drones. That aspect of how you fly it, what time of operation plan, safety management systems, all of that applies to every drone no matter what you're flying. So it's not that you have to start over again because you have a new drone. Really, when you fly DJI and you fly the Blue platforms, you know, the operating system is probably the biggest challenge to get to know, because, you know, most of them use, you know, Q ground control, and there's a learning curve there, but the capabilities of it are much more than what a DJI drone can do if you want to do survey missions or pre-planned missions. But learning to fly those platforms, it's just a matter of anything. You fly it enough, you train, you understand its capabilities and limitations. You're not going to go as far, you know, and when you look at what the SRR was designed for, it was designed for that quick, rapid deployment at a squad level to see what's on the other side of that ridge or see what's behind that building. It wasn't what we're used to flying out far at high altitude to get your results. So training is it's just a matter of understanding the platform. I don't think there's that big of a learning curve between, you know, the Blues and a DJI platform.
Yeah. So Charles, you raised your hand. Rich, you have your hand up. Bobby, you have your hand up. So let's go through those, and then Michael, I promise we are going to talk to you. We do. It would be funny if
I would have raised my hand multiple times.
It would be funny if I just brought you in to punk you, because, you know, I have some vendetta against AUVSI and just have you sit in the corner the whole time. But we are going to talk about green because it's very important. It's the more unknown side of things to me and probably to much of the industry. But Charles, Bobby, and then Rich, if you guys want to throw.
Probably more important.
Yeah, probably more important. So Charles, you want to?
Yeah, I want to, and this will be somewhat focused to Michael as well. But I think that what's been kind of a sentence or sentiment, the message that's gone through is a pathway. Is if we're going to go in this direction, look, this is a geopolitical issue, and as the tensions continue to rise at the national levels or international levels, I don't see this going away. That's the reality. But the pathway is, how do we get to where we want to be without penalizing public safety in the process? And I think we learned in Florida, if you don't have some thoughtfulness about how you do this, you can really damage the ability for public safety to serve its community as it has been doing. So I would, and this is kind of a note to Michael, is I know you're the advocacy officer and you're working a lot with legislatures, is it's important to learn from what happened in Florida, and let's not replicate that. Let's put some thoughtfulness in to say, if you're going to do it, let's have either a grandfather clause, an end of life for the technology, or like Arkansas did now, saying there's going to be a 4-year transition period, which gives everybody, public safety and the industry, a note of, okay, this is how we're going, and this is the direction going forward. And I would also say the other part of this, and I have asked legislators repeatedly, if you're going to be going in these directions, then do some supplementary funding for American drone companies or companies that are green UAS, such that they can balance the playing field. Because when you get into the labor markets, it's not the same. The components are not the same. So you've got to do something to level the playing field. And the last part is also to add additional funding, significant funding for public safety grants to buy the drones, to be able to help them overcome the difference in cost.
Before you, Rich and Bobby, you guys say something, I'm going to raise my hand and say something really quick, and I think it's my prerogative to do so. One thing about funding and sharing funding, Brett and I have worked together, and, you know, we talk about things that happen within the industry. If there was this pool of money and we expected an organization to vet the manufacturer to decide how much money they're going to get, first of all, I would assume there's one manufacturer that would get a lion's share of that for a number of reasons. But it's like, we would probably be scratching our heads being like, they gave how many millions of dollars to them? And there's a misproportionment of funds that, you know, parties at Commercial UAV Expo tend to be like a way that money is spent when it comes from VC. I don't know if it would be the same for funds coming from the government, but I think that that's where it's really confusing, is the four existing remaining initial tranche one of SRR. If you gave them the money, it's probably misplaced. If you gave the additional 2 or 3 Blue UAS manufacturers that were added, it's still misplaced. So how do you make those bets? How do you place the bets on who gets funds, and what do they have to do to prove that they deserve them? Is it a really nice PowerPoint deck and, you know, a couple fly-offs, or is it more than that? Because we did see one manufacturer in the first tranche of Blue UAS that didn't exist much beyond when they were announced, because they weren't up to scratch. And I think that it's just because it's not always industry people doing that vetting. So that's, yeah, my soapbox thing. But Bobby, you wanted to say something, then Rich on the mixed.
I mean, I feel bad thing at the time, because I think the whole reason I think we did this is to actually talk about green UAS and kind of the nuance, the difference between the two programs. But this idea of kind of talk about Tim's point about, like, can China turn off all the drones? I don't think China has any incentive to turn off all the drones, or has the ability. As somebody who worked for a Chinese company, working with engineers directly and knowing how the product works. Like before this, literally 30 minutes before the call, I talked to the guy who designed the DJI government edition ground side. Right, he was head of R&D. He is not a Chinese person, and he's probably designed more of the software that anybody else has touched in the industry. And he kind of explained to me, we did everything. DJI did everything the government had asked for, and it was asking for the same cybersecurity standard that you guys are alluding to, which now is actually NIST, like 800-53 or something like that. There's a framework now for that. But the remotes don't talk to home base, right? And you see that with smart controllers, and whether it's Autels or others. And I'm not trying to be an apologist for DJI by any means. I think, to be fair with you, none of us would be here, with the exception of the folks from the government. Yeah. DJI, the industry wouldn't exist. Many different companies who aren't even on here, you know, wouldn't be around at all, who are very important to this whole industry. So I just, like, I'm not trying to be some shill. I've never accepted money from DJI. I've never worked for DJI. It's just, you know, there's truth to power in speaking what you guys are saying, that the product speaks for itself. But we need to be, I think, honest about the security concerns, and we can talk about that once the green UAS thing comes up.
Perfect. And Rich, you want to mention something as well?
Yeah, just really quickly, as an agency that had to transition from DJI, which, you know, to Blue UAS list stuff, I can tell you one of the challenges is DJI offers a platform for every scenario, whether it's a small tiny drone to do interior operations, or a large heavy lift to carry multi-gas sensors and all that stuff. We had a plethora to choose from, and that's one of the challenges moving to Blue UAS. Now, don't get me wrong, you know, DJI's had an 8-9 year head start, and I understand. I know we're going to be there. We're going to get our gear there. The U.S. manufacturers will be there when the time in the future. But you know, it sucks. You know, when you go from driving a Maserati and then you're going back to learning to drive all over again. Okay, it's a hard challenge to get your guys, talking knuckle dragging firemen here, right? At the end of the day, that's all they are. But the transition over to new Blue UAS stuff, a new drone, Jan 1, we were putting Skydios in place. They realized this is, you know, we lost capabilities, we gained capabilities, right? We have amazing AI that we didn't have before. We lost thermal capabilities. We lost range, but we had these features that we could do now that we couldn't do before with DJI stuff. So at the end of the day, making that transition is not as, you know, challenging as you might think. However, to regain all those levels of capabilities from different size drones to different capabilities, sometimes you're going to have to go to different manufacturers. And now if you're talking live streaming and, flight logs and all that stuff that you got to do, now you got to pull from, whereas DJI, it was one hub. And we just kind of got used to just having everything all the time. And now we're having to, like, the real world kind of kick us in the teeth. So, but, just like anything else, you get lemons, man. You got to make lemonade. You make it work. You figure it out. And we've been able to do that. And so it's not, I can only speak for our agency, but it's not as heavy of a lift as it's kind of sometimes made out to be in the grand scheme of things. But I just wanted to add that in there.
No, I appreciate that. And I think one of the other things is DJI's SDK that they built out, the software development kit, where you can add on to their technology and you can build payloads. And Chris, you of all people know, developing on SDKs, DJI's is a pain because they always change it. However, it does serve hundreds of thousands or millions of drones, and so it's nice as a business opportunity to build a software where you have a total addressable market of million people versus a couple thousand. So that's definitely a limiter with other manufacturers, is that software development kit, which goes beyond just the hardware that you're purchasing. But now is the time, and I would ask for a drum roll, but we'll just get straight to it. Michael Robbins, the man that I said that you're the brainchild of Green UAS. I don't know if you would consider yourself that. I'm sure you had a team. I'm sure there was a lot of work that was behind the scenes, but you're kind of the guy that's pinned to that program. So obviously, like, educate us on the elevator pitch plus a little bit on what Green UAS intends to do, why it was created, how it was created, and where it stands today.
Yeah, thanks, Randall, and I appreciate the invitation. And first and foremost, you're absolutely right. Like, it was very much a team effort, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. But there's a whole crew standing behind me that helped bring this concept, which was really developed in response to concerns we were hearing from our members. So taking that concern and offering a solution. We've talked a lot about, others have talked a lot about today, about some of the unintended consequences that have resulted from the Blue UAS program, and how Blue was stood up really to vet drones for the DoD. But I think in Trent's words, in the absence of anything else, it became this sort of default standard for a lot of other U.S. federal agencies, state and local agencies, and even some commercial entities. And that became a real challenge. Both because Blue was not intended for something other than the warfighter, but also, as Trent alluded to, Blue has been, I'm using my words, not his, has been underfunded, and the number of companies that wanted to get into Blue is much greater than the number of companies that are actually able to go into the system. So, as a result, you've got companies that have been locked out of sales to the DoD because they couldn't get on the Blue list, and you've got companies that haven't been able to make sales to other entities in the federal government and other places that want to, but those entities have also adopted the Blue list. So this was a challenge we were hearing about from a number of our members. So we worked with our Trusted Cyber Working Group, which is made up of about 40 different companies. We stood that up last year in 2022, as well as with the DIU, to stand up a new path with our Green UAS program. And the idea behind Green is that it can be very, very similar to Blue, where for those vendors that want to make sales to the DoD and want to go that route, which, as we know, is a very narrow route, has very specific requirements, including being air-gapped in a closed loop network, there is a pathway for companies to go through the NDA compliance and go through the cyber penetration testing, and ultimately potentially make their way from the green list to the blue list. However, we also know, and we heard this again being responsive to the community, that there were a lot of customers, particularly in the public safety sphere, but also in commercial entities, state and local governments, and in the federal government outside of DoD, that wanted to have some sort of baseline cybersecurity built into their drone. They want to be able to make a risk-based decision for themselves, not relying on a DoD standard, as to whether the supply chain works for them, whether the cyber penetration scoring works for them. So Green also offers this alternative pathway and a degree of flexibility that you can't get with Blue, for companies to go through the assessment, and then we provide the customers with information to make their own informed risk-based decision with the facts on whether that platform or that payload works for them or doesn't. So that was kind of the concept behind Green, and we've been working now. It's really only been live for a couple of months. We've been working with 12 different companies that are currently at various stages of the assessment, some that are getting near the end, some that just entered into the program in the last week or two. So, we've got a long road ahead of us. I think this program will, as our industry does, it evolves quickly with the technology. Will continue to evolve as technology evolves, as the threat situation evolves. Green also has the advantage of not being static. We're not confined by any kind of federal law. So we have the ability to adapt as we get feedback from industry, as we get feedback from customers in particular. And working with our Trusted Cyber Working Group, which again is about 40 different companies, we're going to be evolving the framework on a pretty regular basis over time.
So of the 12 companies that have already applied, or just generally, could DJI become a green listed drone? Could 𝐀𝐻 become a green listed drone based off of the existing parameters?
Yeah, so DJI could not for a very specific reason, and that 𝐴𝐸VSI actually has a policy set by our board of directors where we don't do business with DJI because they are on a number of U.S. federal government lists, in particular the Department of Commerce Entity List, which I think most people know suggests that DJI has been found to be in support of the Chinese Communist Party's suppression of the Uyghur people. Because of that, our board passed a policy where we do not do business with DJI. So DJI is not eligible because we, as an industry association, do not do business with DJI.
Mm. Okay, but it doesn't necessarily preclude that a Chinese manufacturer or an international manufacturer of drone technology couldn't apply for the green list, right?
There are multiple international companies already that have applied for green. Had a call this morning, an onboarding call with a company based in Australia. So we did it in the morning because it was afternoon there or evening there. So yeah.
Okay, perfect. And I think that I do want to. I mean, you were in the dark for so long. I do want to kind of keep getting more green stuff out in the first place of all of this. There's an application fee for green. About how long are you guys trying to turn these around? Because it is only a few months in, but if you get bombarded, is there going to be a bottleneck because the standards and the needs of the industry change almost based off of a technology that DJI puts out? And so for us to constantly be paying catch up on standards, it'd be interesting for you to just give us an idea of where it stands today as far as the requirements from a manufacturer standpoint.
Sure. First, the application fee. There is a small fee. That is largely to ensure that we, as an organization, can't be in the red, because when a company applies, it triggers a whole set of processes here where we schedule onboarding calls with us, with our assessment teams. The company gets access to the software that we've licensed. We have to invest a lot of time just for the initial onboarding of that. That's why there's a small application fee. It ensures that companies that apply are taking the process seriously. We also generate an estimate for them. So again, like that's why there's a small application fee. The timing, that's a great question. I think when we initially set out, we set a very ambitious goal when we talked to our initial companies that started the process, that we were aiming for like 6 to 8 weeks. We have already, could have learned in these first few months that that's probably a bit ambitious. This is it's a lot of work. I think one of the differences between green and blue is we did add a corporate cyber hygiene assessment. That is something in particular that enterprise users want as part of the assessment of the drone. So for companies that have big fleets that are connected to their network, they want to know that the drone manufacturer is taking their own cybersecurity internally very seriously. So they go through that additional assessment as well, and that is a time-consuming assessment in addition to the actual physical assessment of the drone cyber penetration test and the supply chain review. So it's going to take, I think, probably on average closer to 2.5, 3 months for companies. I think that's going to be a more likely average. And we do have the ability to scale. We have 2 companies right now that we're working with that are helping us with the assessment, and we're confident that those 2 companies can handle a fairly high degree of volume, and we have a mechanism to onboard additional assessors in the future should that be necessary.
Perfect. Thanks, Michael. And Brett, I know that you recently went through this process with Brink of applying for green. Do you have any feedback? And I think that transparency is good. It's obviously like, you know, the good and bad could come out. Spare us anything that, you know, maybe should be offline. But yeah, like what was that process like for you as a manufacturer? Do you have any feedback or something that other manufacturers might learn from in your experience?
Sure. I think Michael and I had a conversation maybe one day after the announcement, maybe 2 days after the announcement, something like that. And frankly, my hat's off to AUVSI. They made the actual application process very, very straightforward. It was not challenging to do. It made sense. I think what's important is transparency around the fees. And I think the estimate's very important, but this is more of a question to Michael. What goes into that fee in terms of a cost? Like if there was a COGS for this application fee, I think it's important that people understand. I know you have 2 companies that you've contracted with that are actually carrying out the assessment. I would imagine that's where it's going. But transparency around the fee structure, I think for the OEMs in this space is going to give us a level of comfort with that fee, because listen, when you're a hardware manufacturer, you have manufacturing fees, you have licensing fees. This is not out of the norm. This is fairly common practice for the things that you have to do, and it's just it's part of getting to market. So AUVSI is also a private organization. You know, they need to fund themselves outside of Exponential and the trade shows and membership fees. And I know there's been some back and forth in the industry of, well, why did AUVSI do this? And why wasn't it ASTM or ISO? Well, frankly, AUVSI is the only organization that has any background in drones and in the commercial space. ASTM, not necessarily. I've sat in some ASTM meetings for UTM and kind of wanted to pull my hair out. And so, you know, again, hats off to AUVSI. I think this is an important path that is now separating the needs of DoD, all the other federal agencies, and the SLED market. So nothing but compliments to Michael and his team for the actual application process itself. It was not cumbersome or something where an OEM is going to be like, this isn't even worth the effort. It is absolutely worth the effort.
Perfect. I appreciate that. I'm just on the cost real quick. It really, it is dependent on the drone. I mean, we have some initial information on our website that sort of lays out the cost. But early on, what we try and do in the application process is provide an estimate. But that estimate is going to be based entirely on what the company puts in their application. You know, how complex is the drone? Are you using commercial off-the-shelf technology? Are you modifying that technology? How many payloads do you have? So all of these factors, you know, greatly impact the cost. I think on average right now, based on the companies that are in the program, I think on the low end, companies are looking, you know, all in, you know, all assessments, because, you know, there's multiple different types of assessments that you can undertake also. If you're going the DoD route, you don't add remote connectivity because it's a closed loop network. If you're going, you know, you want to have that remote connectivity, you know, you can add that on. So, you know, I think somewhere in the range of, you know, $60,000 to $100,000 all in is probably about what the cost is looking like right now. But again, that's going to be variable based upon, you know, the individual companies. Some may come in lower. Some ultimately may be higher than that. One company put in, I think, for like 7 payloads. You know, should they decide to go down that road, that's obviously going to be significantly more expensive. So it is variable, and we do try in the interest of transparency, give them a quote, you know, early on in the process once we have all the information, so that they can make a decision whether how and when they want to proceed. Because a lot of times when companies get that quote back, their path forward may change a little bit.
Appreciate that, Michael. And I don't know, Bobby, between you and Chris, who raised your hand first, but Chris, if you want to kick it off, just because, you know, we've heard Bobby's voice a little more. You're muted, Chris.
Yeah, so, you know, I actually have some follow-up questions for Michael, if that's okay. I think, you know, one thing that would be good to get clarity on for this framework is around, you know, how does it differ from NDAA requirements in terms of country of origin, manufacturing? Because I think, look, at the heart of all of this is what's the cost of the drone, right? And so I think there's you know, if we can start talking about a little bit about how those requirements differ from blue, then we can really start getting to, is this a good solution for solving the cost problem and capabilities problem that we're seeing in the public safety sector?
Yeah. So as I said, there's two different pathways a company can go. So you can choose to go the way of blue, and then you're going to have to meet, you know, the legal NDA requirement that is set by the United States Congress that you know, that ultimately resulted in the Blue UAS program's creation. However, if a company, and we do have some companies that have no intention of ever selling to the warfighter, to selling to DoD, their customers are, you know, USDA or the state of Florida Police Department, or, you know, whomever else, or an enterprise company, they have the option of going through the supply chain risk review, and we will write a report on how they do, and we will give that to them, and they can give that to their customer for their customer to make a risk-based decision on whether that supply chain risk works for them or not. We're not going to, you know, say, no, you can't possibly ever become green if you can't meet the DoD threshold for NDA compliance. However, we're still offering that as an option because there are those companies that want NDA compliance to be able to sell to the DoD. So as I said, there's really two different pathways that companies can go. And I think the whole point of green is to meet this demand from industry and from the customers to have more flexibility in the original blue program. We have the pathway to blue. We also have this other new pathway that didn't exist before.
Perfect.
Yeah, but
oh, go ahead. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, just real quick. So just double clicking on this, I think the core question is, if you're trying to create a standard, so green UAS, and if it's a standards-based, you know, assessment, right? So what I'm hearing is that there's going to be a report that's basically going to give an analysis, and then you're basically putting it on the agency to basically say, is this acceptable or not? I mean, is that going to make green viable so that from a legislative lobbying effort, we stop pointing states to the blue list so we can focus on the green list? So, you know, I guess what I'm hearing is, like, if you're leaving it up to the agency to say, hey, let me read this report, right, and make the assessment, is that enough to give legislative ammunition to basically go after and say, hey, state, whatever, here's the list you should be looking at, not the blue list, which is the DoD warfighter?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly hope so. We're undertaking a very aggressive education effort right now with multiple, you know, federal, state, commercial entities briefing them on this. And I think, you know, a key point to this is our Trusted Cyber Working Group, working with our assessment teams, Dark Wolf, which was part of the team with Blue UAS, with DIU, and Fortress Information Security. We have still set a very, very high bar for companies. So, you know, this is not like an automatic, like you apply, you go through this, you know, you pass go, you do well. The part of the reason that this is going slower than I think we anticipated some of the companies to say is this is really hard. Like, we've still set a very high bar, it's a very high threshold. It's just that there is an opportunity for that threshold not to be the same as the NDA components. It doesn't mean that you still don't have to do very well in your cyber penetration test. Doesn't mean you still have to have a very high degree of fidelity. Because at the end of the day, like we talked a little bit about training and you know, and having an understanding of the operator. We all understand, like at a core, it's like in our ethics, it's baked into aviation that safety is sort of our foundation, and that we never compromise safety. Well, that same should be for security. We don't ever compromise security. That's sort of the core ethic of our industry. So we are ensuring that anything that gets on our green UAS list is meeting a very, very high bar of security, just as we expect that operator to have a very, very high bar of safety.
Perfect. We got like 17 minutes left, and I knew what we were doing by pulling in so many people is that it's hard to get everyone's voice out there, and that the conversation could go on forever. Also, that we have a hard stop in that 16 minutes now, or we could just keep talking and be like, and to see who drops last sort of thing. That's possible. But just know, like Tim and Brandon, you guys haven't spoken as much, and Trent, it's been a minute for you. I think the questions that we kind of set, we're going to set those aside and just have an open conversation about the things that kind of keep rolling, because if Bobby has something to say, Rich has something to say, Charles has something to say, we'll fill up the time. So just feel free to say what you'd like. Obviously we'll try to guide it so that it's consistent, but I just wanted to flag that if you got something to say, now's kind of the time to say it so that we don't run out of time. But Bobby, did you want to throw something in the ring?
Just a few things. I think, first of all, I appreciate what AUVSI is doing. I don't believe they're a standards organization. And I think that we have to be very clear what we define as a standard versus a framework, right? The Green UAS is a framework and a pathway. It's not a standard, right? NIST, ASTM, IEEE, these folks make standards. And with respect to Brett, you're my closest homies. I disagree in that regard that I know that ASTM, and you can ask folks at IEEE, they're creating standards. And I would argue everybody technical who's building our products would rather defer to a standards organization versus a industry organization for a specific type of way to build a product. This is how we've been building computers. We've built Wi-Fi. We've built EVs. A lot of disruptive technology is through these types of standards orgs.
So I mean, to be clear, our framework is built off of standards from other bodies like ASTM, NIST, ISO, others. So
the cybersecurity framework it's NIST 800-53. And
well, it's more than that actually, but certainly that is an element of what we've incorporated. I mean, I think, and to your point, like, and I know you in your original LinkedIn post sort of sparked a lot of this. You kind of said like this is not appropriate for AUVSI to play this role. I think we strongly disagree. Like nobody else was doing this, so we stepped in to fill this void because our members and because the end users were saying, hey, this is a huge problem. So any one of those other organizations or any other organization could have stepped up and said, hey, we're going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars and a year's worth of work and do this. We stepped up and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and a year's worth of work to do this. So like I reject the criticism that like this is not the place for AUVSI. Like I think that's just like,
I should mention, for y'all to create a framework, it's fine. I think the term standard is where I have an issue here, because with respect, the thing you just explained to me the last 30 minutes, or sorry, last 2 minutes, it's going to create a lot of confusion with everybody who's just watched this. And all the people know this, from Tim to Charles. You guys are the experts from public safety. How many other people that you know in public safety have this type of knowledge and fluency, or end users or procurement officers? They don't, man. Anyone who's sold to those people knows that people think, oh, it's not on the blue list, I can't buy it. There's a lot of misconceptions, and I appreciate the educational efforts you guys are making. I think that what you just said, that there's a pathway for blue and there's not exactly one as well, is going to create a lot of confusion. And the fact that whatever, I'm sure it's for political reason you decided to exclude DJI, that's going to create even more disruption, right? Like, it's a really hard thing to say, and I'm not, I'm not gonna, it's a political conversation, and that's the problem. Is politics have come here and I think diluted our industry, and it's a shame. It is what it is. We have some real things we have to do as a country. I believe we have to support our domestic base. I'm just concerned that there's confusion in the program and how it's been executed. The intent is fantastic and it's important. I mean, you guys have brought people together from Australia, but you didn't answer Randall's question. Can a Chinese company really do that? Yes, but until when? Because the Chinese company is not NDAA compliant, and then they can't use federal funding to purchase those types of stuff, then what's the point? You see what I'm getting at here?
I mean, we don't set federal law, so we don't.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, though.
So we are out there actively working on a solution, and as I said when I talked about it, like we have every intention of evolving this framework as we get feedback as we go along. I mean, that's one of the great things about what we've stood up. Is that we have the ability to pivot and be nimble and offer other solutions. Next week, getting ahead of myself, but next week at Exponential, we're going to launch our broader Trusted Cyber program that has frameworks for air, ground, and maritime.
That's awesome.
The whole idea is we will be in this space working on updating these frameworks on a very regular basis, taking feedback from industry, taking feedback from government, taking feedback from industry. We have that ability to be flexible. So, I mean, I completely understand what you're saying about unintentionally injecting some short-term confusion, but I think that's better than the alternative, which was nothing.
No pathway, right?
Yeah, no pathway whatsoever. So I'll take short-term confusion while we work to overcome that, rather than having nothing at all. And it's, I think, we've had this opportunity today. We have the opportunity next week at Exponential. We're going to take every opportunity we can to try and make this known and educate people, and we welcome all of you in support of that. It's going to take all of this entire community to overcome this, and we've got a big challenge ahead of us. But I think that we'll get there eventually.
Definitely.
These standardization bodies have had a decade to do something, as well.
True. True.
They haven't stepped up to the plate. They've done nothing. Any new hot technology is going to become political. And DJI is just a small part of this. Let's talk Huawei. Let's talk all these other things that are, domiciled in China. But, at the same time, there's confusion because it's 2 or 3 months old. That's the truth. This thing is brand new. And that's quite literally the impetus of this conversation that we're having, is alleviating that confusion, making it very, very clear what AUVSI's plan is. I don't think AUVSI is holding their hand up saying, we're now a standards body.
Not at all.
That's not what they're doing at all. They're saying, we're going to take these other standards bodies and use what they've done for the benefit of the industry. So that's kind of my take.
Appreciate that. Rich, do you want to go, and then Tim, and then Charles, and then we'll see where we're at that point.
Yeah, I'll be super quick. I'll just say too, I think, Michael, kudos to you guys, AUVSI. Even if whatever you guys have done there, you guys have done a lot of work, but you're starting this conversation. It needs to be had. We need to have this type of green UAS, especially for an end user, right? I'm coming to you from a guy at the end of the chain. What happened here in Florida, obviously we needed a group. If we'd had a green UAS, it would have changed a lot of things, a few years ago. But my concern is, in more to Bobby's point, I think to a little bit is, how do we get, like, you can come to me as an agency and say, hey, look, we meet all your security requirements as an agency, but that means nothing, because the state determines what my security requirements are going to be. They determine the drone that I can use. So my question to you, Michael, is, are you getting a lot of influence at the state legislatures? Are you guys putting the lobbying money into like, hey, here, if you guys are going this direction, let us be your vetting process. Are you guys doing that? Are you seeing that happening throughout the country? I mean, that's kind of my question.
I'm spending, as some of my colleagues are, a lot of time with state, local governments, with federal government agencies, with enterprise users, trying to make the case like, hey, this is new. We know you're familiar with Blue. It's been around for a few years. We've got this out there now. Please, ask questions, poke holes in it. Help us, get this adopted. What do we have to do to get it adopted? We've already heard from one federal agency something very specific that they want. So we are now working on getting them what they want. So that kind of feedback has been great. So yeah, absolutely. I wish we had millions of dollars to go out and market this and have a large scale education campaign and lobbying campaign. We're a modest trade association that doesn't have those kind of funds right now. But we're doing the best we can, and we welcome the support of everyone else in the community. We're also undertaking a very aggressive lobbying campaign right now at the federal level, getting at a lot of the issues that Charles and you have talked about. How do we level the playing field for U.S. drone manufacturers and component manufacturers to ensure that they can compete on a level playing field against subsidized Chinese competitions? And thank you, Charles, for foot stomping the subsidies that DJI in particular has received. We know that distorts the marketplace, so that it's very, very hard for U.S. and other non-Chinese companies to compete on price. Like that's a huge challenge that we have to overcome. But we've seen how Congress has helped with other industries, like the solar industry, with the Solar Energy Manufacturers Act, with the advanced battery technology industry, with semiconductors, with the CHIPS Act. So there have been steps taken to help level the playing field and bring domestic manufacturing back on the U.S. We are actively working on some ideas. We'll be coming forward to the industry and to the community with some ideas soon in form of a white paper that we'll be seeking feedback on. I had a chance to talk to Charles' partner, Chris, last week about pursuing something like what I think Florida just rolled out in the last day or two, about like this rip and replace model. The country's doing that now with Huawei and ZTE technology. We should be pursuing something like that for drone technology too. It shouldn't be a hard stop like they did in Florida. Senator Warner last week called that ham-handed. I think that was the right way of labeling that. But there does need to be a transition period. But during that transition period, you've got to fund programs to get the technology transitioned out. So.
And Randall, I just want to say one quick thing though, and you hit that, Michael, cost and capabilities, right? That's what it boils down to when it comes to drones and public safety. And by the green UAS list, if that's what opens the floodgates up to allow more manufacturers in the game, that drives costs down and increases capabilities, that allows us to get what we need and you guys to deliver the products at a lower cost, and it allows us to compete, and that's a win-win. So whether it's AUVSI that puts a green list out, or AUVSI starts the charge, and other ASTM and all those other standards-based organizations start coming along as well, whatever. If this is what it takes, I'm glad you guys are doing it.
Thank you, Richard.
For sure. So Charles, you're muted, and I'm guessing you want to say something. So Charles,
I want to make a quick. I want to make a quick ask
Go ahead, brother.
Of Michael. And Michael, thanks for the discussions. I'd really like to ask AUVSI directly, when you're out having advocacy in these state legislatures, to really push this idea of a transition period and not an overnight stopping point, because that becomes damaging to public safety. And I'll give you an example. DOI right now, his fleet is grounded with the exception of 6 UAS aircraft that meet the Blue UAS standard. And that flying in rural areas for wildfire operations is a really bad transition process. So with that, and I also ask you to work on trying to get a grant program for that, to rip and replace, so that we have some funding that comes out there for public safety. And that's my ask.
Yeah, no, we are supportive of both of those. It's part of our fundamental principles is on a transition program. So we are there, and that is part of our talking points. Just one real quick point. I know I'm talking a lot now, but I didn't talk a lot in the first hour. So part of the reason why the U.S. government is doing the rip and replace program is because the investments from Huawei and ZTE were made in areas of particular sensitivity to U.S. national security, in particular around intercontinental ballistic missile sites, right? They don't do things randomly. So when we talk about like, oh, this is all just political, like this is all just, geopolitics, like it's not. Like any suggestion that that this is just entirely like true politics, like is kind of, I think suggesting that the threat from China is not real. And to me, that's like willful ignorance of the facts.
Bro,
like,
look at the NDAA though. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's not true. Why would you have gimbals? Why would you have ESCs, these benign, banal parts, right, that have no threat to the drone? It like blows me away. You talked about subsidies. Autel's never received subsidies. They make drones cheaper than anybody else. Like, we didn't have an intellectually honest conversation. You talk about Uyghurs, how much shit that we make goes and kills people all around the world. Spent 20 years in the Middle East. Like, come on, bro. That's the thing I got a problem with. And I'm not the only one. Everybody else who's an end user is seeing this, and they're like, what? We didn't have an honest discussion. That's my concern here. And like, I'm sorry to sound triggered about this, but it's like.
For sure. But this, as far as education goes, Bobby, I mean, like, I just want to say that it's for us to soak it in and like then have follow-ups at Expo or something like that. So I appreciate it, but
sorry, I apologize.
No, don't shut the hell up. I think it's useful, and if we had the time and we had the space, we could get everyone's deep opinions and go over that. But I think just as an educational piece,
I owe Michael dinner next week. We can talk more in depth. I apologize.
We probably all owe Michael dinner next week, because this is such a huge step forward. For you don't want that many dinners, Michael?
Well, I mean, you're putting when the reality is like there's this whole team of people behind me.
For sure.
AVSI and Dark Wolf and Fortress Information Security and our whole Trusted Cyber Working Group. I mean, we met every other week for hours, at a time. We brought them to DC locked them in a room for a day. I mean, there's a lot of people that made this happen. So I appreciate you thanking, me with dinners, but like anybody with an AVSI badge, like they take credit for this.
Definitely. Tim, I want to get to you. I just want to say we're 2 minutes to Michael's hard stop. I think there's probably other hard stops as well. I just want to make sure everyone's good. And if there are like final thoughts that you wanted to get out, I know Brandon, you didn't say a ton either. Like, we could sit and just make sure everyone gets it out, because what this is not for the 100 whatever people that are here right now, but it's a ongoing living thing that we can point to and say, we had this conversation. Here's the place to get educated. Here are some players in the game. So I do want everyone to be able to say what they want to say. So Michael, if you do need to jump, you could jump. If you do have a few words you want to say before that,
a few more minutes.
You're good? Okay. Tim, you had your hand raised. What's up?
Yeah, I think the original point I had has been talked about already, but I just want to say that, public safety, all of our programs were born through DJI drones. We were flying Phantoms indoors, and we adapted to what was available to us off the shelf from Best Buy, and we made it work for us. And that will continue to be our future. I have a lot of respect for Rich and the agencies in Florida that have been forced into this so quickly. Arkansas, they have 4 years. They now have 4 years to get their choices made and transition over. we will overcome and adapt. And I think the important question is where are we going to be in 10 years? Where do we want our public safety and government drone programs to be in 10 years? And I think autonomy plays a big part in that. And how do we get there? Who brings us to that finish line, to where safety becomes always the priority? And will we be manually flying drones in 10 years? I don't think so. I think we're going to be taking the technology, and when DIU accelerates these U.S. companies to quickly put out these drones, they're not going to be without fault, but we're moving into that.
Appreciate that, Tim. Yeah, so again, we're at time. It's been 90 minutes. It went by really, really fast. I know that we didn't all say the things that we would have wanted to say, and we had other questions, and we could have had more follow-up. I do want to go around, and if anyone feels like they have the most immediate time that they need to drop, I think we could probably get a little kind of recap in 10-15 minutes. So Chris, you have your hand raised. I'll just go to you next and see what your final parting thoughts are. And you're muted, just FYI. You're still muted. There we go.
So I mean, look, I think, Michael, I definitely commend AVSI stepping up to basically, to create something, right, in an industry where it's been pegged against the Blue UAS as kind of the default for these states. I think the legislative effort is just as important as the, creating these standards in a framework. But I think my ask of AUVSI for this would be to better clarify, because if I'm a drone startup, hardware startup, and I want to go build a drone and get on the green list, I've got to make a lot of hardware and component decisions, right? And I've read everything you've published on the website so far, and one of them says specifically, including a component subcomponent review to ensure NDAA compatibility. And that immediately is a red flag, because now the green list is now a higher security bar because of its comprehensiveness than the blue list. So again, I think, if we're going to be able to, say, use a ViewPro camera that's manufactured in China, which according to the website right now would not be good to go, I think if, the intention of the green list is to say this is not for the warfighter, but what I'm seeing, the framework you've developed actually goes above and beyond what we're giving the warfighters, because of it still has NDAA compliance, and it's a bunch of other assessments that go above and beyond the blue list. Right. So if the intention is to use this as a benchmark so that we can get the drone industry started in the US and get drones built that have the capabilities and cost effectiveness that public safety needs, then, I love the idea of it still, using a ViewPro camera or whatever, whatever the manufacturer of origin is. Mm-hmm. But again, what's on the website still shows NDAA compliance, which now holistically puts this framework above the Blue UAS list in terms of regulatory, the hurdles you have to get over to get onto it. And what I thought originally was it was going to be, hey, this isn't for the warfighter. It doesn't need to meet these standards. Let's get a list of drone manufacturers, but most importantly, give them the rules of the road up front so that they know how they have a path to go become a manufacturer, build these things with some level of assurance that they're going to be able to meet the green list requirements.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think that's good feedback on the website. I'll take a look at, again, it's constantly evolving. But, when we do talk to manufacturers, we do talk about the two pathways. The NDA compliance is there because for some of our 12 companies, that's what they want. That's what they're aiming for, because their customer end goal in mind is the warfighter. It is DoD, not for everybody. I think the other thing that you talked about, though, is, I'm glad you raised it. I'm getting a little ahead of myself because we're making the formal announcement next week. But one of the elements of our Trusted Cyber program is we're going to be launching a platform, and it's going to take some time for the industry to buy in. We recognize that, but the idea is ultimately this platform will have information on components, platforms, subcomponents, the whole ecosystem of a drone online in this platform, where somebody who wants to design a new drone, as you suggested, can log in and see, like, okay, I need electronic speed control. Which ones are already, have gone through a degree of certification? and I click on that report, learn more about it. Okay, yep, that one meets my risk profile. That's the one I'm going to choose. So that is something that the electric utility industry has already built and is using. So we're modeling our program after that. They have a lot of threats against the grid, so they take cybersecurity extremely seriously. So this ecosystem that we're launching next week is, hopefully designing in time, building a program where drone manufacturers can design with security in mind, and it's no longer just thought of as like a cost or an afterthought, but they have access to tools, resources, information, so that from go they can make informed decisions.
Hey, I've got to drop, so I just want to say something really quick, Michael. One of the important things we're going to have to do as public safety is we have to come together to come to some consensus on some of the operational things and capabilities that we're willing to live with in the meantime, so that we can actually help industry go in a direction that's going to be able to provide us as much as we can get in the short term as we make that path forward.
You're talking from a capability standpoint, like just like how the drone performs?
Yeah, the capabilities, the functional capabilities that we're using now to say what are the ones that we're looking most, what are the priorities, so we can give industry a direction forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely, completely agree. We've had some conversations with some federal law enforcement agencies about some RFPs they're going to be putting out, and wanting to make sure we communicate those out to industry. So when they're designing the next evolution of their drones, they're aiming for those capabilities. But we'd love to discuss more with you on that next week at Exponential. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, just a big shout out to Exponential being one of the most important events of the year in the drone space, where we can all get together and share these things. If you're there, make sure to grab people, shake their hands, introduce yourself. I'll be there for sure. I know that many of you on the panel are going to be there as well. I know that people have to drop, but I do want to continue to just give people time. So if you do have to drop, just like the others, just do your thing. But Brandon, do you want to give any parting thoughts? I know that you came in last minute and didn't get a lot of a shine, but we appreciate you being here. And LIDA is obviously a really great organization for law enforcement folks using drone technology. How are you seeing green, or what other thoughts do you have to share?
I don't see a whole lot of value in green, just as a law enforcement entity. And the reason is everything that we do is subject to FOIA requests. And just like Tim said earlier, I mean, we're going to do whatever we have to do to be able to ensure that we are safe. Now, as far as the data security of what goes through the drone, if we're on agency network, then sure. But that at that point, that is relying on the IT departments of all of those agencies to ensure the safeguard of their network, right? And we have the ability to fly offline if need be. That's one of the great things about about DJI systems, where you can fly under government or you can fly off network and still be able to do everything you need to do. That's the great thing about DroneSense, where you get to fly in a completely separate application. That's the great thing about DroneSense Onboard, right? Like there are pathways that make DJI a extremely safe platform to utilize from a security perspective. But to completely blacklist those systems, I think are only hindering public safety. And I completely agree that, yeah, sure, critical infrastructure, blue, green UAS. But I think that there should be exemptions for public safety to this legislation, because that's where it's going to go. I mean, I know 𝐴𝐸VSI is not a legislator, but the legislators will say it has to be green UAS, right? Just like Florida did with blue in their version of it, right? So I'm cautious about legislation, and I'm cautious about pathways that are overly restrictive when they don't necessarily need to be. I always get asked, like, well, what if DJI is able to watch, 1080p live feed? It's like, well, I can't get 1080p live feed out of my area in a lot of situations with great connectivity. I doubt that they're able to send it over the network to China. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if I'm chasing a meth head through backyards that they get to watch that. I don't care.
I'll just say that the principles of warfare suggest otherwise. We really have no idea. Although I think anybody serving in the intelligence community on a red team can certainly come up with plenty of good estimations of how data could be used against us for national security and economic harm. So I think, just because data from drones hasn't been weaponized in the past doesn't mean that it won't be in the future. So I just, putting that out there, like, that's not like an 𝐴𝐸VSI position. That's just like my view that, like, I think it's a bit, maybe a bit Pollyannish to suggest that, like, there is no threat there. And I think somebody else earlier sort of suggested, like it's not impossible to think that with a pretty simple, software update that the drone doesn't fly anymore, or worse, that drone's now a threat. So
a prime example of that is in 2018. The Mavic, the Matrice M210s were falling out of the sky because DJI pushed a bad firmware update to their batteries, right? And they were just disconnecting mid-flight at 55+%. What ended up happening is DJI didn't ground the fleet. The users did. Users saw that firmware is what were killing drones, and the users put that information out. This is a small network, and people stopped flying, right? It didn't. DJI could have, under that guise, done that and saved a whole lot of money on not only their repair fleets, but also they also could have saved a PR response saying that, hey, we're trying to save it, similar to what FreeFly did not too long ago, right? But they didn't because they couldn't.
So if we certainly hope this doesn't happen, but if tomorrow China crosses the South China Sea and invades Taiwan and is lobbing missiles into our bases in Japan and Guam and taking out our seventh fleet, like, are voluntarily every police department in the country going to ground their DJI drones?
I will be willing to bet that I'll be still using my DJI drones to find the missing autistic kid before it hits a lake. That's my drive, not Taiwan. That's why we have the military. They can safeguard our borders. They have extensive abilities there. I'm more worried about my citizens and my officers.
Right, but if that drone no longer flies, or worse, is a threat, like,
again, I don't think that capability is there. I have not seen that capability. DJI has been able to provide extensive studies and third-party testing that shows that the safeguard of their systems, including one by the Pentagon. I don't know that capability and that fear is there.
But Michael, are you going to go rip all the TVs off walls that are made in China, sitting in conference rooms and in government house? I mean, that's the thing, is like drones are being targeted in this when there's plenty of Chinese hardware running all over the place.
Well, I have two responses.
Can we just pause for a second, guys? I have a feeling we've turned this into an attack on AEVSI when they're not the ones making the policy. They're just following the laws.
Well, I mean,
so let's just make sure that we're not like, poor Michael's getting kind of hammered here.
Yeah, no, I'm not taking it. I'm not pointing this at AEVSI at all. I'm afraid of legislation.
He's just following the rules that he's been told he's got to follow. So let's.
Yeah. Look, and Chris, to your point, like, one, TVs don't fly, but two, AEVSI doesn't represent the TV industry. So we do represent the drone industry. And back to my earlier point on sort of the ethics of safety that we all take very seriously, AEVSI is also elevating the ethics of security.
Look, so I applaud that, absolutely, right? But I think we need to be intellectually honest about, the threat of DJI drones and the ability to do things like offline firmware updates. And so everything's getting lumped into, you have to disprove that they're a security threat. And it's hard to get on that road. And so I think, again, taking this back to what this group is about today is, my hope for the green framework was to say, look, the DoD standards, because of NDAA, like Trent said, are very high, and those have not produced the drones that the U.S. industry needs, especially in public safety, at the price point and at the capability point. And the only way to get that down is to relax those standards so that we're not living up to DoD NDAA compliance. And if the green framework can achieve that, I'm all in. Because that means that the most expensive component on a drone is the sensor. And that is one area that the US is just so far behind on. So if I can use a less expensive sensor from that's not NDAA compliant, then that strikes at the heart of the cost problem and capabilities problem that public safety is facing with this deglobalization anti-China effort. So if you can tell me that the green framework is not going to put the bar above blue, but it's going to bring it down so that we have more sensible non-warfighter drones that we can use in public safety, then I'm all about that. That's what public safety needs.
Yeah, it's both. It can be, again, back to the flexibility of it, it can be both based upon what a particular manufacturer wants. So,
but the ambiguity, though, is what's going to be the blocker for hardware manufacturers to get there, right? like in the federal space, right? There's a concept of FedRAMP, right, which is cybersecurity standards, and they have 3 different tiers. They've got low, medium, and high, right? The green framework almost needs a series of that, right? Where certain states say, hey, look, we're good with green framework low. That way I can use a sensor that's built somewhere else that's a lot less expensive, but more capable, right? So again, if we put the bar above blue, this is going to fail. But if we can put the bar below blue and then be able to have, more relaxed standards about where we're getting components from, because we're looking at the real threat from those, then again, I'm 100% in.
Thank you. Sounds like you're 100% in then. I appreciate it.
Yeah. What minus the current ambiguity, right? And especially to get hardware manufacturers on a path, like the current language isn't going to suffice.
And to that ambiguity, I think that it'll be much more easy for a VC-funded drone manufacturer that's already established to sit in rooms to hear about the standards, that identify and dedicate people to meeting a green standard, where, like Chris was talking before, a startup drone manufacturer, they're, a few people, and to take that on might be a challenge because of the lack of very clear guidelines of what those components require. Brett,
so
do you want to say something? Go ahead.
I can take that position that you just mentioned. Well, first of all, I think the going back to the days of old here is a waste of breath, unfortunately. I don't think there's any world where Congress goes back on their blacklist on the blacklist from the U.S. Commerce Department. I don't think the Department of Defense is going to go backwards on taking DJI off these lists. It'd take an incredible act on the Hill to get either of these things to happen, and it's probably not. But now, whatever the most recent industry TAM statistic is, the 50 to 100.
You're fine, Brett. It kind of went crazy.
Okay, good.
But you're good.
All right, good. So the $50 to $100 billion question here, or whatever you want to call it, is how long is it going to take for these U.S. manufacturers to get up to snuff with the capabilities of DJI, right? And that's really what we're talking about here. And Arkansas taking the 4-year path is at least a step in the right direction from what happened in Florida, which is tragic, and we're all on the same page. That is not the way to do this. 4 years is a pretty long time in this game. I have confidence in our entrepreneurs. I have confidence in our, venture capital world that we can fund amazing people and amazing companies to do this. But this conversation, I like to break it down into 4 categories. There's the labor force. Americans are incredibly expensive to employ to do this work. The Chinese have an influx of cheap, highly educated labor, thousands of people on assembly lines combined with robotics. We can't win there. It's going to take us, and this is why they're on the commerce blacklist. They violate human rights, and that's the impetus of that ban. Best product in the world. None of us are even having this conversation if DJI didn't exist, but that's the reality. Their labor force, we're not going to touch. Number 2 is going to be supply chain. I would have just been in this deeper than I'd ever want to go again. When you start talking about autopilots, flight controllers, ESCs, radios, it is a short list of companies that we can go after. Like, I'm talking a very, very short list with high price points, none of which touches OcuSync, not even close. So we're behind the 8 ball on supply chain, but the CHIPS Act is going to help. But I completely agree with Chris. The sensor part of this is a real challenge. And Randall and I were in the middle of a negotiation, with DJI and their thermal cores. And the reality is, in China, they have thermal sensors that are double the capability and half the price. So supply chain is a massive problem that's going to take 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You don't just spin up fab labs. They're $10 billion a pop, whatever the heck the number is. They take a long time to get ready to go. This is going to take time. So maybe 4 years is the right number. Maybe 5 years is the right number. I don't think we really know. The regulation side of this is still moving along nicely. My question, I wish Michael was still here.
Michael is there.
Great. So Michael, how is the green list interacting with FAA and remote ID, and how does that relationship work? So that's kind of my question. But last statement is, someone mentioned appropriations for public safety to procure these green list and or blue list systems. For a very long time, public safety thought UASI was that engine, and it's not. So if there was legislative action to take a portion of that massive $350 million UASI fund and allocate that towards, you know, the public safety operators that need to do this, that takes some of the pressure away from taxpayers. And I can't imagine being Brandon, Rich, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, going to my leadership saying, you know, that $1 million we spent on that entire drone fleet, can't use any of that anymore. And then lay in front of them the options that you do have. Like, that's an easy, first of all, chiefs and, you know, sheriffs, they don't care about drones really, not yet. They're getting there, but they don't have the time or the energy to think about, do we want to go have to fundraise more? Do we have to go for grants, or is this actually an operational budget line item? These are really challenging conversations to have. So those are kind of my thoughts on, like, how do we compete as a U.S. manufacturer? And I think I am probably speaking for a few people on this call. I would love to see a high percentage of these lobbyist dollars going back into R&D and engineering and winning on product. I'm kind of a competitor by nature. Like, this is a competition. We are all in competition. And the best product is what wins in a capitalist society. And let's do that. Let's go build better products based on supply chain, based on labor. And what's going to augment this labor problem is robotics, is being able to create assembly lines that are highly roboticized, not human hands. And we talked about, how do we increase quality? Well, that's how you do it. Robots don't make mistakes like humans do building things. So those are kind of my thoughts, but I'd love to understand better the remote ID component of this, and how green list is being, put on the FAA's table.
Michael, do you want to answer that? And then Bobby, Tim, and then we'll do Rich, and then we'll be done. Cool?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So we've had a number of conversations with the FAA as we've been going through this process. As you know, remote ID is a manufacturer self-certification. So, and it's going to be required in just a few short months here, as required as part of any drone that's being sold. So it's certainly part of the assessment process if it's a part of a drone. But beyond that, I'm not sure I really understand the root of your question beyond that, like how specifically it would interface with green. I don't know. I mean, clearly there's connectivity, so it'll be part of the remote connectivity assessment. But beyond that, I'm not sure I understand.
No, I think you answered it. There's not much overlap. It's,
no.
The FAA is handling UTM, Lance, remote ID. Yeah. They already have their standards in place. That's great. I was just curious about if they had any play in this, and doesn't sound like there's much.
No, we briefed them on the program. We have another briefing after Exponential. A bunch of folks from FAA will be at Exponential, so we'll get to hear about this. But right now, no.
Thanks, Michael.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. Tim or Brett? Sorry, Bobby.
So I think I haven't been, it's ironic because like what I've been doing in the last several months is like literally consulting these Blue UAS companies, and I probably should be articulating the enormous advances these companies have made every 6 months. So it's probably not fair to be like, yes, DJI makes fantastic product. Where these companies were today is very different than where they were 5-6 years ago. And the advancements are like tremendous. I mean, everybody on the blue list, and probably almost every single American drone company is really making tremendous advances. And it's largely due to, all of it's due to the Blue UAS program. If it wasn't for Blue UAS, you wouldn't have companies, or rather the opportunity for companies, say like Doodle or Modal AI and these other folks, Next Vision, et cetera, to come in and fill the void on the component side. And they are really critical. And I probably should have spent more time talking about how great those companies are versus what I disagreed about with DJI on Michael's opinion. And my apologies for that. But it's really important to bring up, and I think that Tim brought up, the gap it can close, right? And we're getting there. I mean, Tim probably knows better than probably anybody else on the call how all these systems fly comparably. And 5 years ago is probably very different. 2 years ago, a year ago is very different. And I can only imagine what's going to be happening. I mean, next week, we're going to see a bunch of cool stuff at AUVSI. I mean, truly remarkable tech. You already saw the stuff that, Nodal released with the Vox 2 Mini. There's a lot of stuff that's going to come out. It's going to transform the whole industry domestically in the next 2, 3, 4 years. And so I am very optimistic, right? I am optimistic, and I thank AUVSI for coming to this. And really, Michael, I appreciate you coming here and like clarifying this. I'm sorry to be a little harsh on you, and you guys have a very difficult mandate right now, and I think it's important to be empathetic to that.
Appreciate that, Bob.
I'll talk to you guys later. I hope you guys have a great week. We'll see you in Denver.
My daughter has soccer tryouts. I'm sending her a quick good luck message. So I apologize for being looking at my phone there for a minute, Bobby.
Yeah.
I am going to drop as well because I've got to get on the road.
Sounds good.
I just want to say, Randall, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I think we obviously all have a lot of work ahead of us, and the only way we're going to get there is continuing conversations like this, like where we can come honestly, have sometimes difficult conversations, but recognizing that we're all we're in the same boat, rowing together. And if we're not all rowing, then we're sinking. So let's keep these conversations going. I'm honored to be here representing my colleagues at AUVSI. So thank you for the opportunity. And I look forward to seeing all of you, or maybe most of you, next week at Exponential.
Definitely, Michael. Appreciate you. Tim, did you want to say something? And if you got a drop, we'll just get to
just to piggyback on what Brett said. One thing we have to consider is even if the green list comes out, if those platforms do not get on the GSA list, then federal funds like UASI or any other federal funds are useless because you just can't buy them unless they're on the GSA list. So that's all.
Appreciate that, Tim. And I appreciate you guys all joining and kind of working with me. I assume you understand the challenge I have, but also we put together a large panel purposefully to have a lot of different perspectives, but it's just hard to juggle them. So I appreciate you guys just kind of bearing with me and know that everyone's opinions are equally as valid. And this conversation could have been a lot of what Bobby was throwing down and could have been from the passion side of things. I think there was, room for sprinkles of that, but it just would become kind of crazy. Rich, did you want to say something in closing? And I think that's
thanks, Randall. Again, just real quick, obviously the direction of the whole conversation went, which is good because that's what people want to hear, right? That's what we want to talk about, and that's how it worked out. So that's fantastic. Just like in anything else, what we do is you start off with the criticism and you end with some positive stuff. And I think that this conversation was hugely positive and successful. I think it asked a lot of questions and got a lot of answers, and it left some stuff out there, some more meat on the bone for us to talk about down the road, right? Go to AUVSI and have these discussions as well. So this great panel. You guys are all studs, and it's great being a part of this. So I appreciate the invitation.
Appreciate that, Rich. And for everyone that is here, make sure to, if you're in Denver, if you see one of us, shake our hand, say what's up, introduce yourself if we don't know you already. Share this with people. Like, everyone in the drone industry should hear these perspectives. And there's a lot of really important bites that you could take away and really either direct your departments from in creating drone programs. There was questions about international programs and what they could learn from our mistakes. We're talking about Arkansas learning from Florida's mistakes. Well, what about Australia, Japan, the UK learning from our mistakes and how we've approached it? Blue is still the only standard that's out there for the international community as well. And so this is, timely conversation. Wish it could have been 5 hours longer with, tons more to be said. But I appreciate you guys sticking it out, being a part of it, and hopefully it lives on. All right, guys. Take it easy. For everyone that joined, appreciate you guys. And we'll see you again soon.